Before there were towns, before anyone placed names on rivers or drew borders on maps, the world was mostly sky above and water below. And in that sky, far above where our eyes can reach, there was a place where life moved in balance. People there understood themselves as part of something whole. Among them was a woman remembered today as Skywoman. Her story is not told the way one tells a fairy tale or a myth. It is carried like a memory, handed from one generation to the next, a reminder of how the world began and how living beings learned to rely on one another. The story tells that Skywoman fell from that sky world, drifting down toward the great waters. As she fell, the birds looked up and saw her, and without hesitation, they rose to meet her. They did not question who she was or what her arrival would mean. They simply understood that someone needed help, so they used their wings to slow her fall and guide her gently. And from beneath the waters, the great turtle surfaced, offering his shell as a place for her to land. At that time, there was no earth, no soil, only endless water. So the animals dove beneath the surface, one after another, searching for something solid. The beaver tried first, strong as he was, but could not reach the bottom. The loon dove deep and rose again without anything to show. The otter made the attempt, but even he, built for the water, could not bring back what was needed. Then the muskrat, small and often overlooked, swam down and stayed under for a long, long time. When it finally surfaced, it was breathless, exhausted, but in its small paw was a piece of earth. Skywoman accepted the soil gently and placed it on the turtle's back. And from that little handful, the land began to grow. It grew outward and outward until it became the place we now walk upon, what many call Turtle Island. Skywoman had carried seeds with her, and wherever her feet touched the ground, plants took root. Food, medicine, trees that would shelter and shade, flowers that would bloom and return each season. The world became a living place, full of movement and relationship. And that is the heart of this story. The world began through cooperation, not through force, not through conquest, through beings helping one another when it mattered. This teaching lives at the center of the Kanien'kehá, the Mohawk Nation. The Mohawk are known as the keepers of the Eastern Door among the Haudenosaunee, the Confederacy of 6 nations. Their homelands lie along the Mohawk River and the St. Lawrence Valley, stretching toward the slopes of the Adirondacks. And to speak of that land is not simply to describe hills or forests or waterways. The land is remembered as family. A river is not only a river, it is something that has carried the voices of ancestors. The soil is not simply dirt. It holds the footsteps of those who planted and harvested long before us. The wind is not just wind. It carries songs and stories, sometimes softly, sometimes with force, but always with intention. In this way of understanding, human beings are not above the natural world. We are younger siblings. The animals were here first. The waters were here first. The plants, the trees, the winds, they all came before people. They know more about how to live in this world than we do. And so the Mohawk way is one of paying attention. Watching how the deer moves teaches gentleness and awareness. Watching the rivers teaches patience. Watching the trees teaches endurance. Even the smallest flower teaches something if one is willing to look long enough. The rhythm of life traditionally followed the rhythm of the seasons. Spring was a time of clearing and preparing the soil. Summer was for tending gardens, fishing, and gathering. Autumn brought the harvest, food stored for winter, seeds saved for the next year, thanksgiving for what the land provided. Winter slowed everything down. Families gathered around warm fires, sharing stories that contained teachings for the young. These stories were lessons, but never delivered as lectures. They were given through memory, example, and quiet reflection. A child learned not only by hearing, but by being present, watching how elders moved through the world with patience. Language itself reflects this belonging. When someone speaks in Mohawk, they are not declaring themselves alone. The language builds identity through relationship, to family, to clan, to land, to story. Belonging is spoken into being with every phrase, and daily life reinforced this. Food was grown not as individual effort, but as shared labor. The three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, were planted together because they rely on one another. Corn grows tall and gives beans something to climb. Beans return nutrients to the soil. Squash shelters the ground with broad leaves, holding moisture and keeping weeds away. It is a garden, yes, but it is also a teaching. Life grows strongest when we support one another. Homes reflected this same truth. The Longhouse, where extended families lived together, was a place of warmth and shared responsibility. Generations lived under the same roof and learned from each other. The Longhouse also stood as a symbol of the greater Confederacy, with each nation understood as a family within a larger home. The Mohawk at the eastern door greeted each new day. The Seneca at the western door watched its close. The Onondaga tended the council fire at the center. No one stood alone. Leadership was not based on who could speak the loudest or command the most. Chiefs were chosen because they listened well, spoke carefully, and remembered they were there to serve. And above them, guiding and steady, were the clan mothers, those who carried the memory of lineage and the responsibility to ensure harmony remained. Life was not something separate from gratitude. It was built from it. When something was taken, from the field, from the forest, from the water, thanks was given. Quietly, sincerely. Not for display, not for ritual performance, but because giving thanks acknowledges relationship. It reminds us that we depend on one another. This has always been the lesson carried forward. The story of Skywoman does not end in the past. It continues. In every planting, in every shared meal, in every moment of patience. It lives because the people live, and the people remain. Life in Mohawk communities moved at a pace set by the land itself. At dawn, the world woke slowly. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Someone stepped outside to feel the air and read the weather in the tilt of clouds or the smell of damp earth. Children's voices came early, running between doorways, carrying the energy of the day before it was shaped by tasks. And always, there was work to be done. But work was simply part of living, not something separate or burdensome. Tending the field was not just planting or harvesting. It was remembering the hands that had done the same before and preparing the way for those who would follow. Every action, no matter how small, was part of something continuous. The Longhouse was the center of this rhythm. If you stepped inside during a quiet morning, you might hear the soft stir of others waking, the crackle of new wood placed on the fire, the low voices of elders speaking in a tone that felt as familiar as breathing. People came and went, always returning to the same shared warmth. A family was not just parents and children. A family included grandparents, cousins, siblings, parents of cousins, and friends who had long since crossed into the space of kinship. Relationships were not measured in distance or defined by narrow labels. They were lived, shaped, carried. Children grew surrounded by many teachers. A grandmother might teach them how to choose the right squash from a field by pressing its skin gently. An uncle might take them out at dusk to watch how deer move when they think the world is quiet. A mother might show them how to weave a basket so tightly that water cannot escape between the reeds. A father might show them which kind of wood splits easily in winter frost. Knowledge was never owned by one person. It was shared again and again until it belonged to everyone. Stories played a large part in learning. A story could stretch a few minutes or most of a night. Some stories explained why the stars move the way they do. Others taught how to handle conflict with patience. Some stories held humor, reminding listeners not to take themselves too seriously. Others carried warnings about pride or carelessness. And always, the story was told slowly, with space to breathe and think. The listener was never instructed what lesson to take. They discovered it themselves, sometimes only years later when life provided the context to understand. The clan mothers held the deeper thread of responsibility. They watched not only the behavior of leaders, but the health of relationships within the community. They knew how to speak to someone who was troubled in a way that restored steadiness. They noticed when tensions rose. They saw when someone carried grief or anger too heavily and needed support. Their leadership did not need to be announced or displayed. It was felt in how conflict quieted when they spoke, how conversations softened, how balance returned. Their influence extended into governance as well. Chiefs did not rule, they represented the voice of the people. A chief's responsibility was to listen first, speak carefully, and act only when the community's well-being was clear. If a chief forgot this, if pride or anger clouded his judgment, the clan mother who appointed him could remove him. And this was not seen as punishment. It was protection. Protection of the people, protection of the balance that allowed life to continue without fracture. This way of decision-making reflected a deep patience. When councils met, discussions did not rush. Voices took turns. Silence was respected. People understood that understanding takes time. A decision made too quickly could break relationships, and relationship was the foundation of everything. The Great Law of Peace, the guiding law of the Haudenosaunee, was built on this. Not rules, not threats. Understanding, responsibility, listening. It is said that when people gathered in council, they imagined they were looking forward 7 generations. They asked not what was convenient now, but what would protect those yet to come. The land guided life just as much as governance did. The river taught how to travel, how to gather, how to move between communities. The forests offered wood, shelter, tools, and warmth. The fields gave crops that fed families through every season. When an animal was hunted, it was done with care. A life was taken only when needed, and nothing was wasted. To waste was to disrespect the relationship that allowed life to continue. This sense of relationship extended beyond the visible world. The sky, seasons, winds, rivers, they were not symbols or metaphors. They were family. They had their own spirit, their own presence. A person did not speak to the world to control it. They spoke to acknowledge it, to maintain connection. Spiritual life did not need to be separated from daily life, because daily life was already spiritual. Gratitude could be as quiet as placing a hand on the soil before planting. It could be as gentle as offering a word before taking water to drink. It could be as simple as silence shared between people who understood the significance of a moment. Ceremonies existed, but they were private, held with care, not performed or described for display. Their power remained in being lived, not shown. Hardship did not break this way of life. If a winter was harsh, the community pulled closer. If crops struggled, people shared what they had. If someone lost a loved one, the loss was carried by many shoulders. No one faced adversity alone, because no one existed alone. The understanding that life is shared, truly shared, was what held the people steady across time. And through all of it, the story of Skywoman continued to be told, not as something distant, but as something alive. It reminded each new generation that they belonged to a world shaped by cooperation, that the land they walked on exists because someone helped when help was needed, that to live well is to remember that we are part of one another. And so, identity remained rooted. It was spoken, planted, carried, and remembered. The world changed with time, but the center of life stayed firm. If you spend enough time listening to people speak about the Mohawk way of life, one message becomes very clear. Balance is not something you simply have. It is something you tend, the way you tend a fire, a garden, or a relationship. It requires attention, steady hands, patience, and the willingness to adjust when something begins to shift. This idea of balance is woven deeply into Mohawk communities, and nowhere is it clearer than in the role of the clan mothers. A clan mother is not chosen through elections, titles, or wealth. Her leadership is recognized because she has demonstrated, over many years, an ability to guide with patience, to see clearly when understanding is clouded, and to speak in a way that restores calm. She holds knowledge not only of her family, but of her clan, its history, its responsibilities, the character of its members. She knows how to look at someone and see not only who they are now, but who they are becoming. She is trusted to hold memory and to protect the values that keep the community strong. The Mohawk people are organized into matrilineal clans, meaning that a child belongs to the clan of their mother. This connection is not symbolic, it is their identity, their belonging, the network of relatives who will support them throughout their life. A person might be from the Bear Clan, the Wolf Clan, or the Turtle Clan, among others. Each clan carries its own teachings, its own way of moving through the world. These clans are not simply family units. They create bonds between communities as well. Someone traveling from one Mohawk community to another can find relatives simply by meeting another person of their own clan. It is a way of ensuring that no one is ever truly alone, even when far from home. In this way, the clan mother holds more than influence. She holds continuity. She is the one who confirms or removes chiefs, who are known as rotianer. A chief does not hold power in the way the outside world might understand power. He does not command. He does not enforce. His responsibility is to listen, to speak carefully, and to represent the voice of the people. If he forgets this, if pride, frustration, or stubbornness closes his ears, the clan mother can remove him. This is not punishment. It is protection. Protection of harmony, of collective well-being, of the understanding that leadership is service. Decision-making among the Mohawk is guided by patience. When people gather to discuss something important, they do not rush. They do not interrupt. They do not try to win. They speak, and they listen. Silence is not uncomfortable. It is part of the process of understanding. Words matter, but so does the way they are held. People consider how a decision will affect not only themselves, but their neighbors, their children, and the generations who will come long after. It is said that decisions are made with the seventh generation in mind, not as a slogan, but as a lived responsibility. This way of governance forms the foundation of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which connects the Mohawk with the Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, and later the Tuscarora. The Confederacy is often described as a great longhouse stretching across many territories. The Mohawk sit at the eastern door, greeting the dawn and the beginnings of new cycles. The Seneca sit at the western door, watching the close of the day. The Onondaga hold the central council fire, keeping the heart of unity steady. The Oneida and Cayuga stand between them, linking the structure. Each nation has responsibilities, and each contributes to the balance of the whole. This structure is not a government in the Western sense. It is not a hierarchy. It is a relationship, living, breathing, adapting. It works because it is rooted in respect and in the understanding that identity is shared. No one stands alone. No decision stands without consideration. No voice is dismissed simply because it is quiet. Within daily life, these values were carried gently. Children were raised by many hands, not only by parents. They learned how to behave not by instruction alone, but by watching how adults treated one another, with patience, with humor, with awareness. A child learned that they were valued because they belonged, not because of achievement, not because of competition, but because their life was already woven into the life of everyone around them. Work was shared too. Planting, harvesting, mending, gathering, all were done together. The measure of a person was not how much they achieved alone. It was how well they contributed to the whole. There was no shame in needing help, and no pride in refusing to give it. Community was built not on independence, but on interdependence. Everyone had something to offer, and everyone relied on someone else. And through all of this, the clan mothers continued to guide quietly. They watched the emotional tone of the community. They helped settle disagreements. They reminded leaders, parents, and children alike what it means to move gently through the world. Their leadership was, and still is, rooted not in authority, but in care. And care is a kind of strength that does not fade with time. Daily life in a Mohawk community reflected the values that the clan mothers helped protect. The village did not revolve around one person or one role. It moved as a whole. In the morning, people stepped into the day knowing where their hands were needed. Someone prepared food, someone checked the gardens, someone split wood or repaired tools, someone soothed a child, someone sat with an elder who simply needed company. No act was too small to matter. Every contribution supported the rhythm of life, and there was joy in that rhythm, quiet, steady joy. Laughter came easily. Not loud, forced laughter, but the kind that comes when work is shared and time is not rushed. People teased one another gently. Children ran through the spaces between longhouses, weaving in and out of doorways as if they belonged everywhere. And in many ways, they did. No home was closed to a child. No elder was alone unless they wished to be. People belonged to one another in a way that made the world feel held. Teaching and learning happened everywhere. A child might sit beside a grandmother while she sorted beans, and without anything being said directly, the child learned which seeds to plant and which to save. A boy walking beside his uncle in the woods learned how to look before stepping, how to respect silence, how to listen for what wasn't immediately obvious. No one announced these moments as lessons. They were simply part of living. Language shaped this learning too. The Mohawk language is deeply relational. When people speak, they don't just say I or you. They describe relationships, who they are connected to, how they are connected, the role they carry, and the responsibility they share. A sentence does not stand alone. It reaches outward. It carries family, community, and memory inside it. When a child learns to speak Mohawk, they learn that they are not separate from the world, they are woven into it. This sense of belonging carried into how conflict was addressed. Conflict was not feared, but understood as part of living. People are different. People have needs. People misunderstand. The question was never who was right. The question was always how to restore balance. When disagreements arose, they were not ignored, nor were they escalated into argument. Instead, the matter was brought into conversation. People sat together. They took time. No one interrupted. The silence between words did as much work as the words themselves. A clan mother might speak only once during such discussions, but when she did, her words carried the weight of memory and understanding. She did not command. She reminded. She guided people back to what they already knew, but had forgotten in the heat of emotion. When her voice entered the space, it felt like a door opening, letting fresh air in. This careful attention to balance extended to leadership on the wider scale as well. Within the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, decision-making followed a path of dialogue and patience. Representatives from each nation gathered at the Central Council fire, and discussions continued until everyone, not just the majority, could accept the outcome. This did not mean that every decision was easy. It meant that every decision was considered. The Confederacy understood something many societies forget. Speed is not the same as progress. True progress requires understanding, and understanding requires time. This slow, steady style of governance helped maintain peace among the nations for centuries. It allowed different voices to be heard. It created a structure where disagreements could be resolved without violence or dominance. It taught that authority comes from service, and service comes from remembering your responsibility to others. But the world beyond Mohawk lands did not always share these values. As new societies arrived, societies shaped by hierarchy, ownership, and competition, the Mohawk and their neighbors were forced to navigate new pressures. Forces from outside attempted to reshape governance, land use, even family structure. These pressures did not simply bring change, they brought disruption. Identity was challenged, language was discouraged, families were separated. The ways that had sustained communities for generations were threatened. And yet, even during those times of strain, the strength of clan mothers held firm. They continued to teach the language quietly at home. They continued to whisper stories to children at night. They continued to plant seeds in the same way their ancestors had taught them. They reminded their communities that identity is not something that can be taken simply because someone tries to take it. Identity lives in the hands, in the voice, in the small daily actions that continue even when the world shifts. Some things changed, yes, but the center held. People continued to gather. They continued to speak. They continued to remember. They continued to live the values of cooperation and respect that began in the story of Skywoman. The world around them changed in shape, but not in meaning, not where it mattered, not where identity lived. The strength of the Mohawk came from the fact that they did not rely on a single moment or structure to define them. Their identity was carried in relationships, and relationships endure. The clan mothers carried that endurance. They were the steady flame in the Longhouse, the ones who remembered the stories deeply enough to guard them and gently enough to share them. Through them, the community continued to move with balance, even in times of great change. Even as the world outside changed, the balance kept by the clan mothers remained the foundation of Mohawk life. Their guidance did not come through speeches or commands. It lived in the way they walked, how they listened, how they chose their words carefully and only when needed. Their leadership was not loud, it was steady. It had weight because it was consistent. When children grew older, they often realized that the lessons they carried did not come from any single moment. They came from countless small interactions. The way an elder paused before speaking. The way seeds were saved from one season to the next. The way disagreements were softened before they could become wounds. These were teachings of how to live in harmony with others and with the world itself. Life was not separated into parts, social, political, spiritual. It was all one. The work in the fields, the conversations in the Longhouse, the gatherings at the riverbank, all were expressions of the same core values. The idea of community was not something spoken about. It was practiced again and again in simple, everyday ways. This is why the Mohawk people remained strong even when faced with pressures meant to divide them. Pressures that came in forms of land loss, forced assimilation, and attempts to replace traditional ways of life. These forces did create hardship. There is no need to hide that. Families were strained. Voices were silenced. Pain lived beside people who had not invited it. But the teachings did not leave. They simply moved into quieter spaces, waiting to be carried forward again when the moment was right. Clan mothers continued to teach language, even if whispered. Elders continued to share stories, even if only to one or two at a time. The land continued to speak, and those who listened continued to hear it. Identity did not vanish. It endured. And endurance is its own kind of strength. This is how the Mohawk came through times of great change, not by abandoning what made them who they were, and not by refusing to adapt, but by carrying their values with them wherever they went, into new systems, new work, new landscapes. The outside world shifted, sometimes quickly, sometimes with force. But the internal world, the world of cultural memory and shared responsibility, stayed rooted. That root would become even more important in the generations that followed, when Mohawk families began to travel far from their homelands, not by choice of displacement, but to find work that could support their communities back home. Work that required courage, balance, and calm in the face of great height. The work of the ironworkers, the men who walked on steel the width of a hand, hundreds of feet above the ground, the ones who became known as skywalkers. But they did not go alone. They carried the Longhouse with them, in their sense of cooperation. They carried the teachings of the land, with each careful step. They carried the voices of the clan mothers, reminding them who they were and who they were responsible to. The story of balance did not stop, it simply rose higher into the sky. There came a time when the world around the Mohawk people shifted again. Cities far from their homelands began to reach upward, rising toward the sky with steel and stone. Bridges stretched across wide rivers. Towers climbed higher each year, and new kinds of work emerged with them. The Mohawk people, whose identity had always been rooted in steady hands, careful attention, and the ability to move with balance and awareness, found themselves drawn into this new world. Not because they were seeking adventure, not because they wished to leave home behind, but because they were looking for ways to support their families and communities during changing times. The work of high steel, walking beams that hung far above the ground, was dangerous. There was no denying that. But for the Mohawk men who began to take on this work, the height did not feel like chaos. They knew how to move with calm in uncertain places. They knew how to let the body stay steady and the mind stay quiet. These abilities did not come from training schools or manuals. They came from a lifetime of reading the land, stepping on uneven roots and rocks, following narrow trails along rivers, climbing trees and hills with patience and presence. Their balance was not simply physical, it was something carried in the mind and heart. The first Mohawk men who worked high steel traveled to places like Montreal and later to New York City. Word spread through families, through conversations shared around kitchen tables and winter fires. Soon, groups of men traveled together, leaving before dawn to catch trains that carried them across long distances. They brought with them their humor, their language, and their steady way of working. They slept in boarding houses, shared meals, sent money home, and returned whenever they could. Their work was not just labor, it was a contribution to the well-being of everyone back home. The cities they entered were loud, fast, and crowded, so different from the slow breathing of forest and river. Yet even in those places, the Mohawk found ways to remain anchored. They formed close groups of workers who looked after one another. They watched each other's steps on the beams. They knew that trust was not something spoken. It was something built in the way a hand reached out at the right moment, the way a voice called out just before a bolt shifted, the way silence could communicate more than words ever could. They did not call themselves fearless. Fearlessness was never the goal. What they carried was focus, a calm mind, a steady step, a knowledge that each movement must be intentional. People often saw photographs of Mohawk ironworkers sitting casually on steel beams high above the city, eating lunch or resting. Those images became iconic. But the men in those photographs were not posing for spectacle. They were simply taking a break. To them, the height was something they accepted, not something to flaunt. And the work they did changed the landscapes of entire cities. The Mohawk helped build some of the most recognized structures on the continent. Bridges that stretched across waters once thought unbridgeable, towers that touched the clouds. The skyline of Manhattan, the one people around the world looked to as a symbol of ambition and power, was shaped in part by Mohawk hands. Steel beams that hold the weight of thousands of lives each day carry the memory of those workers, men who moved with care, humor, and quiet confidence. But while the city became a place of work, home remained the heart. When the day came to return, trains carried them back to the Longhouse, to the sound of rivers, to the voices of children calling, to the smell of wood smoke in the evening air. They came back to plant gardens, to attend ceremonies, to sit at the feet of elders, to raise their families in the same rhythms that had guided their own childhoods. They carried two worlds at once, one of steel and height, one of earth and family, and they walked between them with dignity. Some families lived in both spaces for part of the year. Neighborhoods formed in cities where Mohawk families stayed together, places like a section of Brooklyn once known as Little Caughnawaga. There, children grew up speaking Mohawk inside their homes and English outside them, learning from an early age how to walk between worlds. Women in these families played a powerful role, holding community together in places far from the sound of the forests. Their strength often went unrecognized in photographs or headlines, but it lived in every meal cooked, every letter sent back home, every night spent teaching children the stories that might otherwise be forgotten. The work was hard. The separations were hard. The fear of a knock on the door with bad news was something many families lived with quietly. There are stories of men who did not return. These losses left deep marks, not only on families, but on entire communities. And when grief came, it came to everyone. The community held the weight together, the same way they shared joy and work. Still, the ironworkers continued. Not because the work was easy, but because it was needed. It allowed families to remain together. It allowed communities to stay strong. It allowed cultural life to continue where it might have otherwise been fractured. And through this, something became very clear. The Mohawk did not work high steel because they were trying to escape their identity. They worked high steel because of their identity, their steadiness, their sense of responsibility, their understanding that no one moves through the world alone. These values, rooted in Skywoman's story and carried through the clan mothers, rose with them into the sky. As more Mohawk men joined the iron trade, the knowledge of how to move along steel became something shared across generations. A young man might first learn from simply watching his father lace his boots at dawn, wrapping leather not too tight, not too loose, in a way that allowed the foot to feel the beam beneath it. He learned to check each tool twice, not out of fear, but out of respect for the work and the life that depended on it. He learned that the walk to the job site in the early morning was not a time for talk. It was a time to settle the mind, to bring the body into stillness before stepping into the sky. The elders who had worked the beams before him didn't give long speeches about courage. They spoke in short phrases, easy to remember, easy to carry. Watch your balance. Trust the man next to you. Don't rush your steps. Breathe steady. Lessons that sounded simple yet held whole worlds. In the city, the Mohawk ironworkers moved together like an extended family. They shared food, shared rooms in crowded boarding houses, shared jokes to ease the strain of long days, shared silence when the world pressed too heavily. Their humor was often dry, understated, used to lighten the days that stretched high above pavement and noise. A single raised eyebrow, a muttered comment, a short laugh between beams could shift the tension of an entire day. They understood each other with few words. Work days were long. Steel beams rang with the sound of hammers striking rivets. Winds whistled through unfinished frames. The city could be heard below. Car horns, shouts, the constant motion of millions of people who never looked up to see the men above them. Sometimes fog wrapped the steel and the world felt small, like standing inside a cloud. Sometimes the sun hit the beams so fiercely they radiated heat. Other times, snow made every step a negotiation. And still, the work continued. There was pride in finishing a piece of steel, in seeing a bridge stretch across water that once separated places, in seeing a building rise where before there had been nothing but open air. But the pride was quiet, not boastful. The ironworkers knew what they were building. They knew the city rested on beams they had set with their hands. They didn't need to say it. What mattered more was going home. When the work season allowed, trains carried them back to the longhouses and river valleys. The shift was immediate. The air felt different. The sounds softened. The body recognized home long before the feet touched familiar ground. A man who had been walking steel at dizzying heights would return to a world where the loudest sound might be wind in the pines. He would set aside his climbing harness and pick up a fishing net, or an axe for splitting winter wood, or seeds for planting when the season turned. And in the evenings, he would sit among family, listening to the laughter of children and the low voices of elders sharing stories that stretched back farther than memory. This movement between worlds, between heights of steel and the grounded paths of the homelands, became a rhythm that shaped entire communities. Children grew up knowing that their fathers and uncles might leave for a time, but they also saw the return. They learned that providing for the community sometimes meant traveling far. They learned that strength can look like quiet endurance, not grand speeches or bold gestures. Women held life steady at home. They managed households, traditions, language, and emotional connection. They raised children to know their clans. They kept stories alive. They were the ones who made sure that when men returned, they returned to something whole. Their work was not behind the scenes, it was the center. Without their steadiness, ironwork would have been only labor, not part of cultural survival. There were hard moments, too. The kind that were not spoken about in photographs or city reports. The kind that sat heavy in the chest. One man not coming home. A place at the table left empty. Families gathering to support each other, because grief was not carried alone. The same teachings that guided life also guided loss. The community leaned in closer during those times. Love did not disappear when someone passed. It stayed, held in stories, in names, in the way footsteps continued along familiar ground. And still, the ironworkers continued. Because the work allowed the community to stay together. Because it allowed the Mohawk to remain on their land. Because it provided the means to raise children within their culture rather than be forced to trade identity for survival. Over time, something powerful became clear. The Mohawk were not simply adapting to new work, they were shaping it. Other workers looked to them for steadiness. Foremen relied on them when the job became complex. Newcomers learned by watching them. The iron trade came to recognize the Mohawk not as laborers, but as specialists, as people who understood the steel with their bodies and instincts. Even today, if you visit certain job sites high above city streets, you may hear the sound of the Mohawk language carried in short exchanges between workers. A small reminder that the Longhouse did not stay behind. It came with them, always. Identity traveled, culture traveled, memory traveled. The beams were high, but the roots stayed deep. Today, Mohawk ironworkers continue to walk the steel. New buildings rise, new bridges stretch across water, and the same quiet steadiness is needed. But the story has shifted in meaningful ways. Now, the knowledge is not just about how to place your feet on narrow beams. It is about understanding where those steps come from. Young ironworkers learn from fathers, uncles, grandfathers, but they also learn from the deeper memory of their people. They carry the understanding that their balance does not begin on the steel. It begins in the Longhouse, in the stories, in the gardens, in the river valleys where their families have lived for generations. Some communities have schools dedicated to teaching Mohawk language, so children grow up speaking their identity from the first words they form. Cultural gatherings continue through every season, where elders share teachings and young people dance, sing, and learn. Families plant the Three Sisters not just as food, but as a reminder of the lesson of cooperation. Clan mothers continue to guide, steady and clear, as they always have. Their leadership remains one of presence, not spectacle. The work of renewal is not dramatic. It happens slowly, the way a tree grows, layer by layer, season by season. A language is remembered in small phrases spoken at the kitchen table. A child learns a song while helping prepare food. A teenager watches their grandmother's hands when she braids corn to dry for winter. These moments do not look like ceremony to an outsider, but they are. They are ceremonies of everyday life, of remembering who you are by how you move through the world. And the ironworkers, the skywalkers, continue to carry the culture forward in their own way. You can see it when they stand on a high beam and pause to feel the wind. You can hear it in the way they speak softly to one another during work that demands silence and trust. You can feel it in the calm they bring to places where fear would overwhelm others. Their steadiness is not a performance. It is identity lived through the body. The cities may not know the names of the men who built their skylines, People crossing bridges may never think about who set the steel in place, but the Mohawk know. Their families know. Their communities know. And the land knows, too. The work is remembered where it matters. This is not a story of the past. It is not something finished or distant. It is ongoing. The Skywoman story still guides the teachings of cooperation. The clan mothers still hold the balance of community. The ironworkers still walk between worlds, steady and sure. Children still grow into their roles surrounded by family and memory. The Mohawk people continue to speak their language, plant their gardens, sing their songs, tell their stories, and walk their path forward. They have endured change not by becoming something new, but by carrying who they are into every place their footsteps reach. The Mohawk story is not one of disappearance. It is one of presence, of resilience without spectacle, of strength without noise, of identity lived, spoken, and remembered. They are still here, and they will continue to be.